The morning I came back from my fishing trip up at Cedar Lake, I almost didn't notice anything was wrong. The gravel crunched under my tires the same way it always had. The old oak at the end of the driveway was just starting to turn. Edges of the leaves going amber and rust the way they do every October in Tennessee. The house looked the same from the outside, white clapboard siding, green shutters. The porch swing my father built in 1971, still hanging where it always hung. I sat in the truck for a moment before going in. I do that sometimes. 67 years old, and I still need a minute before walking into that house alone because some part of me still expects her to be there. My wife passed 2 years ago last August. Pancreatic cancer. We had 11 weeks from diagnosis to the day I held her hand and watched her go. 41 years of marriage. And 11 weeks. I still reach for her in the morning. I still hear her humming in the kitchen sometimes. And then I remember. I grabbed my cooler from the truck bed and headed inside. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. My son and his wife had been staying with me for the past 4 months while their apartment lease ran out and they waited to close on a new place. That was the arrangement, 4 months, maybe 5. I'd been clear about that. They'd agreed. What wasn't usual was the smell, fresh paint. I set the cooler down in the entryway and stood there. The living room looked the same. The kitchen looked the same. Then I walked down the hall and stopped in front of the room at the end, the room that had been my wife's sewing room for 30 years. The room I'd kept exactly as she left it, because I wasn't ready to change it and I didn't owe anyone an explanation for that. The door was open. It wasn't a sewing room anymore. The walls had been painted a soft gray. There was a desk in the corner with a monitor and a ring light. Shelves had been put up, new ones, not the ones my wife had, and they were filled with my daughter-in-law's things. Candles, books, small decorative items I'd never seen before. The sewing table my wife had used since before our son was born was gone. The baskets of fabric, the framed photos she'd kept in there, the little shelf of paperback romances she'd read every winter, all of it was gone. I walked in slowly. I opened the closet. My wife's things were not there either. I stood in the middle of that gray room for a long time. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My daughter-in-law was leaning against the doorframe with a coffee mug in both hands, looking at me the way someone looks when they've been waiting to see how you'll react to something they already decided you'd have to accept. "We thought it would be better as a home office," she said. "I've been doing my remote work at the kitchen table and it wasn't working. We figured since you don't really use this room." "Where is her sewing table?" I asked. My voice came out quiet. That surprised me. She shifted her weight slightly. "We moved some things to the garage." It made more sense too. "Where are her photographs?" A pause. "They're in boxes in the garage. Walter, they were just sitting there collecting dust. Nobody was using that room. We needed the space." I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the gray walls. I thought about my wife standing at that sewing table making a Halloween costume for our son when he was 7. I thought about the afternoon light that used to come through the window and how she always said it was the best light in the house for threading a needle. "Where is my son?" I asked. "He's at work. He'll be home around 6. I nodded. I walked past her into the hallway, past the kitchen, out the back door, and I sat on the porch steps for a long time looking at the backyard. The garden was still there. She hadn't touched the garden yet. The rose bushes my wife had planted along the fence. The little stone path she'd laid herself one summer when she decided she wanted to learn masonry. Still there. I breathed. I was not a man who shouted. I'd learned a long time ago that the loudest thing in a room is rarely the most powerful. My wife used to say I had a talent for being still in the middle of a storm. What she didn't know, what I hadn't told her, because I didn't want to worry her in those last months, was that I'd already started being still in a very particular, very deliberate way about 6 weeks before she passed. There was a reason for that, but I'll get to it. When my son came home that evening, he walked into the kitchen and set his keys on the counter and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been coached. It was careful, preemptive, like he'd been rehearsing in the car. "Dad," he said, "I know you saw the room. I want to talk about it." "Sit down," I said. I had made dinner. Pot roast. Because I'd been gone for 2 weeks and the refrigerator needed clearing out. I set a plate in front of him, and one at my own seat, and one across from him where my daughter-in-law would sit. And I sat down. "I'm sorry we didn't ask first," he said. "We should have. But you were gone, and she really needed the space to work. And that room was just—" "It's been 2 years, Dad." 2 years, I repeated. "She was my mother. I'm not saying forget her. I'm just saying the room was empty." "It was not empty," I said. "It was exactly the way she left it." He looked down at his plate. My daughter-in-law came in from the hallway and sat down and unfolded her napkin without looking at me. "I understand why you're upset," she said, in the tone people use when they don't think you should be upset at all. "But we're living here too, and we need to be comfortable. We've been here 4 months. This is our home, as much as—" She stopped. Maybe she heard herself. I set my fork down. "This is your home as much as what?" I asked. The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. "How did you mean it?" She looked at my son. He was studying his pot roast, like it contained the answers to questions he didn't want to be asked. "Walter," she said, "we've been contributing here. We've been paying utilities, buying groceries, taking care of the yard. We've been treating this like our home. Because you asked us to make ourselves comfortable. I asked you to stay for 4 months. I said. I asked you to be comfortable. I did not ask you to repaint the walls. I did not ask you to move my wife's belongings into boxes in the garage. I did not invite you to make decisions about what this house is and is not." She set her fork down now too. "I think we need to have a bigger conversation about what the living situation is going to look like going forward." "Going forward," I said. "Nathan and I have been talking." She glanced at my son, who still hadn't looked up. "The lease on the new apartment fell through. The deal on the house we were hoping to buy isn't going to close. We're in a difficult position. And we hoped you might consider making this a more permanent arrangement." "Permanent," I said. "You have more space than you need. You're here alone. It makes sense, financially and logistically, for all of us to share." "And you thought you'd start by redecorating," I said. "We thought we'd start by making it feel like a shared space instead of a museum," she said. Her voice was harder now. The careful tone was gone. I looked at my son. "Did you agree to this?" He finally looked up. "Dad, it's not I mean. We've been talking about it, and I think Renee has some good points about the finances and—" "Did you agree?" I said again. "To what she did to your mother's room?" He didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. Neither of them spoke. When I was done, I put my plate in the sink and went to my bedroom, the master, the one with the windows facing east that my wife chose when we first moved in, because she liked waking up to the morning light, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about 6 months ago, about the conversation I'd had with my son 3 weeks after my wife's funeral, when he'd said, very gently, very reasonably, that maybe the house was too big for just me, that maybe it made sense to think about the future, that he and his wife would be willing to help out with the property if I needed it. I thought about the way my daughter-in-law had walked through every room that same week, touching things and measuring things with her eyes in a way I hadn't been able to name at the time, but could name very clearly now. I thought about the attorney I'd called a month later, the one who handled estate planning and real estate law, the one I'd sat across from in a small office downtown and told everything to every conversation, every feeling, every small alarm bell I hadn't been able to explain. The one who had helped me understand my options, and then helped me act on them. I thought about a document that existed now in a filing cabinet in that same attorney's office, and in a safety deposit box at the bank 3 miles from this house, and in a sealed envelope in my fishing tackle box that had been sitting in the truck for the past 2 weeks. I was quiet for a long time. Then I made a phone call. My neighbor, a man I'd known for 22 years, who had been friends with my wife, who had helped me clear brush from the back property line 3 summers in a row, he answered on the second ring. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," I said. "How's Thursday for you?" "Thursday's fine." "What do you need?" "I need a witness," I said, "and maybe some coffee." He didn't ask any more questions. That's what I valued about him. The next 2 days were ordinary on the surface. I put my fishing gear away. I unpacked my bag. I ate breakfast in the kitchen while my daughter-in-law worked in the gray room at the end of the hall, and my son left for work. I watered the rose bushes. I went to the hardware store and bought a few things I needed for a project. I was pleasant. I was quiet. I cooked dinner both evenings because I liked cooking and because there was nothing to be gained from being hostile. My daughter-in-law seemed to interpret my calmness as acceptance. By Wednesday evening, she was talking at dinner about what she thought could be done with the spare bedroom upstairs, the one my son had used as a kid. She said she'd seen some ideas on a home design website. She said the window up there got good afternoon light, and she thought it would make a nice reading nook if you took out the twin bed and put in a window seat. I said that sounded like a lot of work. She smiled. "It's worth it if we're going to be here long term," she said. "Make it really ours." I thought about that phrase. Make it really ours. My son watched me from across the table. He had the look of a man standing too close to the edge of something and not quite sure how he got there. Thursday morning, my neighbor came over at 9 o'clock, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee. My daughter-in-law was in the gray room, with the door closed, on a work call. My son was at the office. I opened the tackle box. I took out the sealed envelope. I also took out a smaller folder I'd been keeping in the box. A set of papers that had been signed and notarized and filed with the county clerk's office 11 months ago, in the fall before my son and his wife had ever mentioned moving in, back when I first began to understand what I was looking at. My neighbor read through them quietly. He's a methodical man. He takes his time. When he was done, he set the papers down on the table and wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at me. "You've been thinking about this a while," he said. "About a year," I said. "And they don't know. They don't know anything," I said. He nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be here when I have the conversation," I said. "I need someone who can verify later what was said and how." He nodded again. "All right." We had lunch. We talked about other things, his grandson's soccer team, the truck I'd been thinking about trading in, whether the winter was going to come early this year. Around 2 o'clock, my daughter-in-law came out of the gray room and stopped short when she saw my neighbor sitting at the table. I introduced them. She was polite. She said she had some errands to run and would be back before dinner. She took her keys and her purse and left. My son came home at 5:30. My neighbor was still there, reading a paperback at the kitchen table. My son gave him a puzzled look, but said hello. "Dad," he said. "Can I talk to you?" "We can all talk," I said. "Sit down." He sat down. My daughter-in-law came in about 10 minutes later and stopped in the doorway when she saw us all at the table. "Something's happening," she said. "Not a question. I'd like you both to hear some things," I said. "Please sit down." She sat next to my son, and whatever she felt in that moment, she hid it well. I had the papers on the table in front of me. I didn't touch them yet. "Before we talk about the house," I said, "I want to say something first. I love my son. I loved his mother, and she loved him. And everything we built here, this house, this property, we built it for our family. That has never changed. It will never change." My son's jaw was working slightly. His eyes were wet. I hadn't expected that. Or maybe I had. "When your mother got sick," I said, and I understood what was coming. I started paying attention to things I'd been letting slide. Conversations, patterns. I noticed certain things happening that worried me. I didn't confront them, because I didn't want to spend the time I had left with her on conflict. I chose to act quietly instead. My daughter-in-law shifted in her chair. 11 months ago," I said, "I met with an estate attorney. I restructured the legal framework around this property. The house is now held in a trust. I am the sole trustee. The terms of the trust are specific, binding, and already on record. My neighbor witnessed and can verify the timeline." Silence. "What does that mean?" my son asked. "It means the house cannot be sold, transferred, subdivided, or refinanced without my explicit written consent and direction as trustee. It means no one, family included, acquires any legal interest in this property through residency, contribution to utilities, verbal agreements, or any other informal arrangement. It means what happens to this house is, and remains, my decision." My daughter-in-law's face was very still. "You did this because you don't trust us," she said. "I did this because I'm 67 years old. My wife is gone, and I am not going to allow confusion about who owns this house," I said. "I did this because I watched the way you walked through these rooms in the weeks after her funeral. I did this because I have seen this story before, in other families, and I made a choice to write mine differently." "Nathan," she put her hand on my son's arm. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head slowly. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, something between relief and grief and shame. "Dad," he said. "Let me finish," I said gently. "I don't want you to leave. That is not what this is. You are my son. You can live in this house as long as you need to, and I mean that sincerely. But you will live here as a guest in my home, not as a co-owner, not as someone who makes decisions about which rooms get repainted or which belongings get moved to the garage." My daughter-in-law stood up. "This is unbelievable," she said. "We've been here for months. We've contributed. We've been operating in good faith." "Have you?" I said. She stopped. "The room at the end of the hall," I said, "belonged to my wife for 30 years. You moved her belongings out of it while I was away, without my knowledge or permission. You repainted the walls without asking me. Last night at dinner you were describing plans for my son's childhood bedroom. I would call that operating without any faith at all in my right to this house." She looked at my son. He was looking at the table. "Nathan," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "About the room. I should have stopped her. I should have called you before it happened." It was the first honest thing he'd said in 4 months. I could hear how much it cost him. "I know," I said. "I know you should have." My daughter-in-law picked up her purse from the counter and walked out of the kitchen. We heard the front door open and close. My son stayed at the table. My neighbor poured them both another cup of coffee without being asked, and then went and stood at the window, giving us what privacy he could in a small kitchen. "I've let her push me around," my son said quietly. "I know," I said. "I keep thinking if I don't make waves, things will smooth out. But they never do." "No," I said. "They don't." He rubbed his face with both hands. "What do we do now?" "That is a question you need to answer," I said. "I can tell you what I need. I need the gray room put back the way it was. I need your mother's sewing table brought in from the garage. I need her photographs brought back in from the garage and put exactly where they were." I paused. "The rest is between you and your wife." He nodded. He sat there for another hour. We didn't talk much. At some point, he helped me with the dishes. He was quiet and subdued, and it reminded me of when he was 12 years old and he'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and had to go apologize by himself because I'd told him that some messes you clean up on your own. I'd watched from the truck at the end of the driveway. Some things don't change. My daughter-in-law came back late that night. I was in bed, and I heard the front door, and voices in the back bedroom low, indistinct, the cadence of a long and difficult conversation. I didn't listen. That wasn't mine to be part of. What happened between them over the following weeks was theirs to work out. I set no ultimatums about her. She was my son's wife. And whatever she was or wasn't, I wasn't in the business of ending marriages. What I was in the business of was my own house, my own peace, my own life. She was cooler with me after that night. Careful. She stopped making suggestions about the rooms. She stopped talking about what things could become. She was, for the first time in 4 months, someone who understood she was a guest. Whether she accepted it or resented it, I couldn't say. Probably both. 3 Saturdays later, my son spent the entire morning in the garage. I stayed out of it. I drank coffee on the porch and read the paper and listened to the sound of things being moved. Around 11 o'clock, he came to the back door. "Can you come look at this?" he said. I went to the room at the end of the hall. The desk was gone. The shelves were bare and leaning against the wall. The sewing table was back in its spot under the window, and the afternoon light was already finding its way through the glass and settling on the wood surface exactly the way it used to. The photos weren't up yet. He'd stacked them carefully against the wall, the frames clean, the images intact. He picked one up and showed it to me, a photograph of my wife at 34 years old. standing in that very room, holding up a quilt she'd just finished, grinning at the camera with the particular satisfaction of someone who has made something beautiful with their own hands. "Right here?" he asked, pointing to the wall where it had always hung. "Right there," I said. He hung it. He hung all of them, and I told him where each one went, and he didn't ask why, and I didn't have to explain. When the last one was back on the wall, we both stood in the doorway and looked at the room. "It smells like paint," he said. "It'll fade," I said. "I really am sorry, Dad." "I know you are," I said. "I know." We stood there a moment longer. The light through the window was the same light it had always been, unchanged, indifferent to everything that had happened in that room and everything that hadn't. My wife had loved that light. I loved it too, because she had. "She's agreed to couples counseling," my son said finally. "We're going to start next week." "Good," I said. "I don't know how things are going to go, but I need to stop letting. I need to be better." "Yes," I said. "You do." He nodded. He looked young in that moment, younger than his age, the way adults look when they finally see something they've been refusing to see. It isn't a look of defeat, exactly. It's the look of someone deciding to stop pretending. That evening I made a simple dinner, nothing special, just soup and bread and the last of the pot roast. We ate together, the three of us, with less conversation than usual but less tension too. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after something has been decided rather than before. When the dishes were done, I went out and sat on the porch swing. The night was cool and clear, the kind of October night that smells like wood smoke and cold air coming down from the mountains. I could see the outline of the rose bushes along the fence, bare now at the canes but still rooted, still holding their ground. My wife used to come out here on nights like this. She'd bring 2 mugs and sit next to me, and we'd talk about nothing for a while. The neighbors, the garden, whatever my son was up to at school or later at work, whatever small news the week had held. Then we'd go quiet and just sit. The swing moving gently, neither of us needing to say anything at all. I thought about what she would have thought about all of this. I thought she would have wanted me to be clear. She was gentle, but she was not soft. And she had strong feelings about people overreaching, about entitlement, about the assumption that love means you're allowed to take. She would have been disappointed in our son. She would have been unsurprised by his wife. She would have asked me what I planned to do about it. And when I told her, she would have said, and I could hear her voice as clearly as if she were sitting next to me, "Good. Don't let anyone make this house something it isn't." I'm not going to let that happen. I made her a promise in those 11 weeks, sitting by her hospital bed, that I would take care of what we'd built together. I meant the rose bushes and the stone path and the photographs and the sewing table. I meant the porch swing her father built and the kitchen where we made 40 years of dinners. I meant the room with the light she loved. I meant all of it. My neighbor called the next morning to check in. "How'd it go?" he said. "About how I expected," I said. "Maybe a little better." The room is back," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "She would have liked that." "She would have," I agreed. We talked for a while about other things, his truck, the weather, whether to get breakfast at the diner on the county road. We settled on Saturday. I put the phone down and stood in the kitchen with my coffee, looking out the window at the backyard in the morning light. 67 years old. A house I built over a lifetime, with a woman I loved more than I have ever been able to say out loud. A son who is trying to find his way back to something. A room at the end of the hall that smells a little like fresh paint and a lot like everything else. It's enough. Some mornings, when the light comes in at just the right angle and the garden is still and the house is quiet, it is almost more than enough. I picked up my mug and I walked to the room at the end of the hall, and I stood in the doorway and I looked at my wife's sewing table and at the photographs on the wall and at the October light, doing what it has always done, falling exactly where she used to stand. "Good morning," I said quietly, and then I went back to the kitchen to make another cup of coffee, and I got on with my day.